Thank you all for coming. Well, let's talk, what are these lakes? You know, we call them lakes, but they're really retention ponds. They're essential part of the water management process. With all the rain and stuff we get in Florida, we've got to have some way to manage it, and these lakes are part of it. So once we get them, we got to make sure they stay healthy so that there's a decent environment behind your homes, and they don't get eroded and things like that. So the first thing is the stormwater management. Second is we'd like to maintain their aesthetic beauty as well. One of the things we do now, we've been contracting for years with companies that have now been consolidated under Solitude. And Solitude they have 3 contracts with us. One is for a monthly contract for the lakes, another is for the aerator system, and others for fountains. So the big one is the lakes. This is an example of the report that we get monthly. And I was thinking, Chuck, if we could, is it possible we could load this up to Live Sandoval so that everyone can see it? Because I don't think you get to see this, and it's pretty important stuff. They take photos of all the lakes. Now these are examples of healthy lakes, and they're ours, right? And by each set of photographs, in this case, the site looks good, shoreline grasses are well maintained, so forth. I won't do all of them. But now, normal growth, but some of them are in pretty good shape. Alligator weed is noted here. So we got to look at that. Got to spot treat the brush here. Algae seem to be well controlled. But you notice one common thing about all this, they all have a good set of littoral plants around the edge of lakes, which promotes lake health. Not only, one thing it does is all these nutrients that come out of our lawns, we can't stop that. You know, the water from Cape Coral that we fertilize and we wash our lawns with is full of nutrients, and these littoral plants help to absorb that and keep it from polluting our lakes. This one has alligator weed that needs to be treated. This one needs some attention. Torpedo grass, pennywort, and alligator weed. Algae, okay. But once we load this, you'll all have opportunity to see them, okay? Here's another one, treat for torpedo grass and alligator weed in the littoral plants. Algae is okay. So I won't go through all of this, but there are reports for all of the lakes, and I'll show you a diagram at the end. If you look this up on Live Sandoval, once we post it, you'll be able to see where your lake is, because they do by number, but then attached is a map with the numbers of the lakes showing all of our locations. Okay? Any questions about that? We have, for a while, we had Lake Watch, which is no longer active, but we have, in addition to the work done by Solitude, we have something called Pond Watch. Pond Watch is run by Lee County. The main person, Ernesto de la Vega, is in charge of it. Very cooperative guy. And this is at no cost to Sandoval that we do this. All right? So the ponds we test at least 3 ponds per month. Those samples are sent in, and then we get reports from that process. All right? We are going to do, welcome.
Hello.
Folks, this is Matt Lewis from Lake Doctors. Appreciate you coming.
Sir, having me.
We've had, erosion is a thing of concern in any of these lakes. In fact, when I started this process of being the liaison to the Lake Committee, I knew very little about it. I don't even live on one of the lakes. But as I've learned more and more, this is a problem that's all over Florida, for that matter. And Chuck and I went to a meeting recently where different neighborhoods associations showed what they're doing to work these issues with the lakes. Erosion control, littoral management, and so forth. The more we can get all of us involved in that process, the better we can do it. We do not have a Lakes Committee. We want to, but the people that are doing the pond watch love to do pond watch, but they don't want to go to meetings. So what I'd like to ask is if, when we finish here, I'm going to pass a note around and say, any of you that would like to become part of the Lakes Committee, please do so, because we need you. Right? And we have up to 6 people that we'd like to put into this. We're going to be doing an erosion study, but it can't be done now. We have to wait until the water level goes down so we can see the erosion. Also, there's 2 or 3 places already that we know have erosion that need to be fixed. We'll be addressing that, but that too cannot occur until the water level goes down. All right. So what we want is an effective Lakes Committee, and I want to encourage your membership. And then once we get the committee going, then we're going to go out for bids for the erosion study. We've talked to Solitude about it. We want to talk to others about doing that as well. Right? And if you've got any piece of paper to write something down, there's a website I think you'd all like to look at. It's called wetplan.org, wetplan.org. And there's a myriad of presentations and photographs and things of communities all near us and how they manage their lakes and what they've done, the problems they've had, and the way they've addressed them. Okay?
All right, so I'm with the Lake Doctors. My name is Matt Lewis. I've been involved with every aspect of lake management since 2007. Treated lakes, was a fountain technician, field manager, and sales. So I've seen varying sides. Done a lot of studies with alternative treatments, bacteria, enzymes, aeration. That was kind of my big focus, and then I went to school for business management so I could blend the two together. That's not showing up on here. I don't know how to close that out.
Yeah, close window.
There we go. All right, I'm sorry. So I wanted to be able to come and speak to people who had no knowledge of lake management, stormwater ponds at all. When I moved to Florida, I'm originally from Kentucky, we did not have stormwater ponds. Kentucky has more streams and creeks than almost any other state in the union, but we had 0 stormwater ponds. So Southwest Florida in particular, all of the stormwater ponds that you see, almost 95 to 98% of them are man-made structures. It's actually an engineering marvel when you look at the big picture, because all of the ponds are connected and it's an interconnected system for stormwater management. Without the stormwater ponds, the peninsula would not be built up for our homes to be dry when we get the influx of rain. Now the real estate agents or people in general, just however this worked out, I don't know chicken or the egg scenario, but turns out that stormwater property, if it's lakefront property, is a lot more valuable. Okay? So in a community like yours, you've got a major asset in your lakes. All right? You got many homes that are lakefront, but homes that are not lakefront benefit from the lakes, and they're just important. The lakes are just as important to those homes as the people who actually get the lakefront view. But it is important to know exactly what they are so that you can have an understanding of what the regulatory issues are what needs to be done, why it's changing, and why are you spending money on it. I give the example that communities may spend $800,000 a year for mulch, knowing that it's going to look good for 6 months, it's going to wash away, but you do get that instant gratification, you get to see it, and it does look beautiful. But it's an expense, and you pay it because you know it looks good and you want it. Lakes, everybody sees the surface. You see whether or not there's algae, you see if there's grasses around it. But what you don't realize is that if a lake has reoccurring issues with vegetation and algae, it's because of internal loading. That the nutrients that has went into that pond, either whether it's been an influx or it's been a slow build, has built up at the bottom, and you have too much nutrients in the pond, and you kind of get in a rinse repeat cycle where you see reoccurring algae, you get submerged vegetation issues, sometimes you get smells, you'll have discoloration. So there is visual signs, but that's why you have an aeration system that was installed in the last couple of years. When did you guys put that in? 2 years ago? So that was a large expense.
The what system?
An aeration system, that's the bubblers.
Yeah.
So that's an expense that doesn't provide the instant gratification that a fountain does. You know, your fountain out there is beautiful, but it only affects the surface layer of the water. First few feet of the water is getting moved and agitated. That layer of the water gets moved and agitated with rain, wind. What an aeration system does, it takes the water from the bottom and causes circulation and mixing to where instead of having a thermocline and we call it a dead layer, but it's basically an area devoid of oxygen. The deeper you get, depending on clarity, but when you get deeper than 8 feet, you really start to lose oxygen levels, and anything deeper than 12 feet is usually almost devoid of oxygen. So you don't have any aerobic bacteria, you don't have any fish down there. The aeration system remedies that. By the mixing, you have consistent oxygen level throughout the entire lake. You also allow for some of the excess nutrients, specifically nitrogen, instead of staying in the pond, to be released as a gas, because you're speeding up the ammonia cycle. Well, it's not the ammonia cycle, but it goes into ammonia and then it comes out as a gas. So I'm going to start from the beginning. When Sandoval is thought up, they're going to design a community. The very first thing that's done when they break ground, one of the first few things that's done is the lakes are dug. Okay? The lakes are dug for the field that we discussed, for the roads, and the stormwater system is put in. It's calculated for the 100-year storm. I don't know if you've heard that, but if you talk with the district or anybody, they always use the calculations of a 100-year storm. We had a 100-year storm, total rainfall amount, when we had Irma, and then we had all the rains before that. So, to give you an idea of, you fared well during that, that's what they kind of consider the 100-year storm. So, flood control is number one. Then, ecosystem health. Different regulatory entities may be concerned with that, but that's something you're going to be concerned with. Look at every pond as an individual ecosystem. They're connected. The waters do mix, but each pond has its own biosphere, its own ecosystem, its own plant life, its own wildlife. You know, they're different. I heard you mention shoreline erosion. The ponds are dug. They're not thinking, you know, how can I stabilize this shoreline for 30, 40 years? They're thinking, how can I stabilize this shoreline for 3 years to get the final CO and get out of here? You know, that's just kind of how it goes. And you got littoral plants that help. They really help with the wind and waves from the lake coming in. When you have sheet flow coming in, littorals will not stop that. All right, so that's when you've got an area where you see rain comes through, it comes in, basically, it's just a sheet flow. It's coming in, it's got a lot of volume and force behind it. Littoral plants down at the lakeside are not going to prevent all erosion, but it is a great hindrance and a help to most issues. And then aesthetics. I put that down, it should have been number 4, but all of your regulatory agencies, your building code, they're not concerned with aesthetics. I heard you talking about Pond Watch, and we work with Pond Watch. I really like Ernesto, and I joke with Ernesto because there's a lot of good algae that scientists love to have in and amongst the littorals and around the lakes. And their logic is 100% correct. It's the best thing in the lake for filtering, and it's natural. But boy, you tell somebody who's paid $50,000 for a lakefront or a golf course that's charging a couple $100 a round that's the good algae and you need to leave it alone. So there's a balance there that we try to strike. I understand your stakeholders, you have an aesthetic interest that should not be discounted. So it's just something I like to joke about when you're talking with regulatory agencies. They're not concerned with aesthetics. So state and water quality priorities, I kind of just went over that, but your water quality and your storage volume. Another term you'll hear a lot is something called TMDL. TMDL, total maximum daily load. Basically, that's the maximum amount of nutrients, runoff, buildup that can go into a pond. If it exceeds the threshold, you go from a healthy lake to an unhealthy lake. And then there's stages where you can go. If it gets too bad, you'll get to a eutrophic state. All right, that's your lakes. You're not anywhere near a TMDL limit, but that's just terminology to know. Stores all the runoff until the water is naturally filtered and free of pollutants before being discharged off site. That's what they're supposed to do. We see on the news about the harmful algae blooms in Lake Okeechobee, and they're wanting to build another reservoir. Everyone you talk to will have a different solution. At the end of the day, if all of the communities in Central Florida doesn't keep their ponds up, have them functioning properly, there is not enough reservoirs that can be built that is a solution. It's something that we all have to understand. I'm a transplant to Florida. We love the weather. We came down here. There's a lot of us populating Florida. We have to take our own steps to not over-fertilize, not get excessive nutrients into the lakes, because every time a pond is not functioning properly, that impaired water goes to the next pond, to the next pond, to the next pond, and it exponentially gets worse. We're the exit. So from Mickey Mouse south, we get all of the stormwater. Anything that's not filtered through one of the ponds, if you go up 27, and you see communities just like this, if their ponds are not maintained, if they allow their ponds to sedimentate, instead of holding instead of being 20 feet deep, let's say it's 17 feet deep. On a 3-acre pond, you lose 3 feet to organic buildup and muck. That's a lot of storage that you're losing. Well, it's got to go somewhere. And then it gets to Lake Okeechobee, it goes out the east coast or the west coast. That's the two. The state sets the priorities. The district is heavily involved during the developmental plan. The county has a building code, the big one for the building code for Lee County. They're your erosion and your plants around the shoreline. That's mainly what the county is involved with. The water management district, they usually focus on function and your wetlands for an established community, and then whether or not however your irrigation permit is structured, the district has some say-so on that. The HOA, I'm putting everybody kind of in importance to let you see that there is a lot of people always above what our instincts are, just whether or not the pond is pretty or not. The HOA, and then the homeowner is, you need to communicate with the HOA, because that's the best way for you to get anything done. So I'm going to go on to the next one because I've hit this quite a bit. Oh, what did I do? Everybody does it. When you drive through the community, you're going to compare this lake to that lake, and this lake to that lake, and this community to that community. It's human nature. We have to do it to have a standard. Just always remember that every lake is different. Every lake has its own ecosystem. So the uniqueness of the clubhouse lake is going to be different than the lake that you live on and the lake that you live on. That doesn't mean that one should be in poor shape and one in great shape. It's just that there's typically reasons of those differences. And then the other thing is, you know, when you start looking at ponds that may have riprap or erosion control and different things, there is different permitting agencies, all of those entities that I went through a few minutes ago and kind of discussed ad nauseum. A different community may have a totally different building plan than how Sandoval is. So just keep that in mind. But a balanced food web is what we're trying to create. My 1 minute spiel, this is my mission statement, my personal mission statement, and people ask what I do is I take a man-made stormwater pond that's basically a trash collector and turn it into an aesthetically pleasing, habitat thriving ecosystem. That's the summary. That's not done in one step. That's, you know, that's the big picture. But, you know, you want to have plants and things around you. Get a little bitty picture, but you want, if you like having wading birds, if you like having good wildlife, you know, that's where your littoral plants. They provide all the habitat for your fish, your small fry, your wading birds, turtles, all your waterfowl. Yes, snakes too can get in there. Alligators can. I mean, you know, those things can happen. But overall, the ponds are not a swimming pool. So the way to keep them healthy is to let them mimic nature. If you come in, there's lake management, there's lake spraying. You can come in here every other week and you can spray out algicide ad nauseum, and you know, you can kill the algae, you can kill the macrophytes, you can kill the invertebrates, you can, you know, sterilize that water column. But over time, algae is a living plant. You know, it's got a living cell. They get build up resistance to herbicides and algicides. There is no algicide or herbicide legal that you can put in a lake that keeps algae or plants away. Okay? Most all of your herbicides and algicides are what we call reactive, meaning if it's not there, and you come and there's no algae here today and you put the algicide out, you're not doing anything except targeting all the other things I mentioned that you're not wanting to kill. That's not to say that algae could not grow tomorrow, but that algicide does not have any long-lasting effects. Now, it's not like a swimming pool where you can get the chlorine and you keep it at that level and you keep it clean. It doesn't work like that. So that's kind of, so this is pictures from Sandoval. You guys have a lot of nice littoral plants. You really are lucky in that regard. Many communities, they don't have the littoral plants, and that's something that the county is now coming back on, communities that they've let go for a long time, and they're making them put in the plants.
Is there ever a point where there's just the littoral plants are too high or overtaking the lake?
So, yes and no, very rarely. For the height-wise, there is a couple of good plants that can grow fairly tall. Giant bulrush is one. Thalia is another one. Most communities want those either targeted and removed on site or kept away from behind people's residence, homes. As far as overtaking, as the water levels go down, the plants will follow the water level. But the plants, if I go back to that slide that showed this shelf, I don't want to mess it up, so I'm not going to. They're designed to stay in that zone. with a couple feet of water that's kind of mucky and then can be seasonally dry. So as it gets deeper, they theoretically should, but we can keep them at like a 10-foot buffer. Those are kind of preferences, especially spike rush is one that propagates very well. So you can kind of reduce it some and it's going to grow back. And then, you have some items that need to be treated in and amongst the plants, alligator weed and duckweed. It was here in 2016 when we was here, and it's just a plant that you can get rid of it, but it's going to come back. And you will have some collateral damage to those plants when you treat that. So that will reduce them some as well. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a quick thing, Matt, since you've been on site for a long time too, to kind of dovetail your question, and Matt kind of hit upon it. Everything you see in the lakes is there for a reason and or a code that the state or whatever governing body told us we had to have. Well, with the littorals, you'll see different littorals. You'll see 3 or 4 different species at 3 or 4 different areas of the lake. So as you are at the lake bank, you might see the cannas, which have the big yellow flower. Then as you go in, you'll see spike rush and you'll see arrowhead. Those are there because of specific reasons. They thrive in different spots of the water bed. The height, especially of the cannas, they're the first ones that you'll see with the yellow. They tend to grow a little bit bigger. The main reason that we found, and Jim can kind of agree, is because of the human impact on that. And Matt will agree, 99% of our problems are human derived. When our sprinkler systems are spraying on the littorals, we're putting basically Miracle Grow on those. And that's why we were so forceful about having the HOA in our, for those folks who have landscaping done by a contractor, make sure those sprinkler heads aren't spraying into the lake because we're dumping nutrients into the lake. Now the littorals are getting taller just because we're feeding them. But just another point being is that those littorals are not the homeowners. They're not really the HOAs per se. They're part of the water management stormwater process. So they're there for a reason. They cannot be removed. They can be added to if there's a sparse area or if people remove them illegally, but they're there for a reason and they need to be there, so there can't be any arbitrary trimming or anything like that without permitting per se.
Yeah, there's 5 zones, as he was saying, that starts with your oak trees would be, say, zone 1, and then you've got, this is a good picture to kind of hit on that, is, I got a little button here somewhere. This is a buffer zone, okay, so this is the high water mark. This is not at Sandoval, so I give you, but this is the high water mark. And then this is the buffer area. Buffer areas are a great tool. You have that sheet flow as I was talking, it comes down. You got water coming down, so if you have a buffer area, that will absorb a lot of the energy and turbulence from that water coming off the street. Then, like right here, this is that zone we're talking where most of your littoral plants are designed for this zone right here. You don't have a ton that's designed to really go out deeper. So that's why I say they really won't take over, because the ponds are dug to keep going down. But it can appear that way, especially if you're in a cove area. Where the lake gets to a really skinny cove, those can fill in. The problem with buffers is it can become no man's land. Meaning, like, let's say we're going to leave a 5-foot area, we want it to grow a little bit. It's on the turf before the shoreline, let's say. Well, that 5-foot area, we can't spray this up here because it's into your sod, but then it doesn't get mowed. And so it's just something that they're great, but be aware, make sure whoever your lake company is and your landscaper, this area doesn't go unnoticed. Because that was one thing when we were here in 2016, we had a buffer area, and we had started, and then there was a new landscape company, and there was a couple of complaints about the shoreline of the lake, but it was the buffer area. And it can visually, it can make your lake appear like it's not in good shape, because down where where the lake is, there is no grasses. That's all your littorals. But you know, the buffer area, this is not as bad as the other one, but to the appearance, if that's something that's new, you know, think that the lake vendor's not doing a good job, and that doesn't matter if it's lake doctors or anybody else. It's just, that's why it's good to have involved people, Lake Committee, Landscape Committee, HOA managers, so that you can make these decisions. Some communities like a buffer area, some don't. Some have a 5-foot area, some have a 10-foot area. You know, that's not, the buffer area is not a code thing. That's just something that if you've got some areas that's got bad erosion and you want to try to slow it down and you don't have the funds to do anything else, you know, that's just one option. But I did want to mention that those areas, I turned them no man's land. I bring it up all the time now because they've become very popular, and they're also very unpopular to figure out who is actually going to take ownership of it and either cut it, mow it, something with it if you decide to go that way.
Can I just ask you one
Yeah.
quick question? You mentioned it, and I was going to bring it up, was in that zone, and you said oak tree. And I'm glad staff is here too, because in our docs, it says that all lakefront properties have to have one shade tree. And that, again, is driven by code.
Yep.
So, and I'm, again, glad staff and board members are here. When we tell somebody they can cut down their shade tree, and a palm isn't a shade tree, we're basically going against our environmental resource permit, because that is a required piece of that.
So,
It's got, it's a reason because the root system holds the bank together? Is that one of the reasons, or?
I think Matt probably would agree, yes, but it does a multitude of things.
yeah, so in 2012, Lee County redid their building code. And there's a section called, if you want to look it up, Lee County Building Code, Deep Lake Management Plan. And that I know has the requirements for the shade trees. I always say oak tree, obviously there's probably a couple of other ones, but that's where they break down the 5 zones, and it starts up, you know, the oak tree being your highest, and then it goes down. I don't know exactly what they have in there for the reasoning. I know one of it's shade for fish. Your root system's there, but it is in there. And then you also have, like I said, you've got your own kind of specific permit to your community that will have specs in there, but the standard Lee County Building Code does have it.
John, another thing is they're native trees, so they require less care treatments with fertilizer and pesticides, so that's why that buffer
Makes sense.
critical.
I'm a big proponent of native planters. If we put native landscaping in our communities, we don't need all the fertilizers and things. And I know you guys are doing pond watch. You know, if you've got good nutrients in your lake that's being used for irrigation, you know, let your landscaper know that. You know, let them know what is there, because they're not going to put out more fertilizer if they don't need to.
It's the other way around. Our water comes from the city, it's recycled sink and toilet water, and they upgrade it somehow, at least that's the way they spin it. But we did slip bottles in to the sequence of testing with Pond Watch to have that water tested, and it blew Ernesto's mind when he said, I think something's broke.
Even stuff coming out of the ground.
Yeah, so we verified that, yes, this is a major source of nutrients getting into our water, so it's potential that just the irrigation water alone could be sufficient for fertilizing our lawns, but we do both.
That's a reclaimed water system.
Okay, so you know, I think we started talking about this years ago, and I'm not sure if for you guys that are new here, Jim and Scott was like the leaders starting a lake committee a few years ago, so I do know them, and we have another community that's done quite a bit of studies on that with taking samples and reducing fertilizer, and they've not had any issues with their vendor, you know, landscaper on that side. But each lake is separate, distinct, ever-changing ecosystem. I like to discuss that a lot because it just helps if we can have a common understanding when we do discuss the issues on the lake. You know, when you have an issue in the lake, something's treated, you gotta let it run its course, okay? You know, something's treated, it dies, it decomposes. Usually, when something is treated, it's gonna take anywhere from 3 to 10 days for you to see that results. Once you see it start turning, then it will, if it's duckweed, stuff like that drops out pretty quick. Some of your torpedo grasses and brush may take anywhere from 14 to 21 days to fully, quote, die, and then it takes time to decompose. So many of your lakes have duckweed and alligator weed in and amongst the littoral plants. It was a problem 5 years ago, it's still an issue today. You know, that's just one of those plants that there is no silver bullet that's going to get rid of it and it never comes back. You can get rid of it, it comes back. Duckweed can lay dormant for, I don't know, a couple of years, I think it's something crazy, and then when it gets wet, it can propagate. It can spread sexually and asexually, so duckweed can really take off when it gets in somewhere. When you're treating duckweed and torpedo grass in and amongst the littoral plants, you can do selective treatments for torpedo grass that has very minimal effects on your littoral plants. When you're treating, this is alligator weed. I took this picture last week. So this is alligator weed. There's a little bit of duckweed. You really can't see it in this picture. That's mainly algae you're seeing in and what's down there. But when you come in, we come in with a couple of different herbicides that we can use. We can get all that out of there, but you may see some collateral damage in and amongst your plants. There's no way you can get a good treatment without having a little. Good news is it's not killing your littorals. It wounds them a little bit. It's not killing the bulb. They're going to come back. But you know, otherwise, this alligator weed will outcompete all your littorals. So you have to control it, or it'll starve your littorals out.
Yeah, where our lake is, I think it was one of the natural lakes. I think it was here when the development was built. I don't think we really have littorals, but what it looks like is that we actually have grass growing out about 10 feet. Could it be grass, or is it a different kind of weed?
So it could be grass.
It's a shallower part, so it doesn't really have that pitch. And the drop there times that it actually just gets down to the muck, and I think that's when it actually starts to grow.
It very well could be a type of grass. Problem is there is a lot of good plants that people call grasses, you know, so I'd have to see it, but it could be, yes. I mean, especially torpedo grass, if it grows in an area like you're talking where the water fluctuates, once it gets started, they chase, you know, if the water comes up, it continues to chase to get through the water. So you can have torpedo grass that gets this tall just because it's, you know.
There used to be a point in time when it rained, we had rainy season,
Mhm.
you wouldn't see that grass anymore.
You know, Bellingham?
Bellingham, Sundown.
Yeah.
So is that something that could be taken care of, or is it?
If it's a grass, yeah, absolutely, and if it's a beneficial plant, I mean, you know, I said there is a lot of communities that will say keep their spike rush or plant that's very aggressive and grows well, they'll limit how far they allow that to grow out, so yeah, it could be.
Those lakes that were existing were never designed with a planted shelf. I mean, they were borrowed pits from long ago, and so there's not the adequate ledge there to establish, but there's still probably an opportunity for some plants in there, preferred plants.
Do either of you all know what they do that?
Yeah, it's the old borrow pit where we did fall under the regulation of
okay.
stormwater management because it was an existing body of water.
It's outside of the drainage
And
basin.
Correct.
Your lake probably has the prettiest color in the
Correct.
community.
Correct.
Well, it's got a really good ecosystem.
Yeah.
We have no aeration system, we have no algae, I mean,
Well, so the old rock pits,
Right.
you know, I mean, this is a great time because aesthetics is all in the eye of the beholder, but for my preference, the old rock pits are the prettiest lakes in Southwest Florida because the rock, the limestone, the minerals give it that pretty blue color. Every rock pit I've ever worked on is gorgeous. There's one up off Kismet. Lehigh has a great big one that's, you can't get to it anymore, but yeah, they're very nice. A lot of people from the Midwest come down to Pine Island and Sandoval, and when I meet with them, I have to discuss what they're looking for, because more often than not, it's the hue of the water. It's kind of brownish, you know, it's Pine Island. I mean, it's what it is. There's nothing wrong with water. I could take a cup of it and hold it up and it's crystal clear. But it's got just a mucky bottom. There's nothing to reflect, so when the sun comes through, it looks brown. Well, we could dye it, but you know, it's
Pardon me, I want to do something while you're talking,
Mhm.
because I want, while people, I have their attention. I want to
I'm
pass
not
this.
sure I got their attention still.
I
It's
want
been
to
a minute,
pass
so.
this around. If you want to be on the Lakes Committee, put your name, email, and phone number on there and pass that around.
How often do they meet?
Huh?
How often do they meet?
Well, we'll find out.
It has
The
to be
minimum is
said.
quarterly, but optimally maybe once a month, particularly during important times.
So, if you want to have say-so over the lake, getting on the lake committee or a board or being involved is your probably best avenue. Because all of your vendors work for your community, but the board, property manager, you know, they're given the marching orders of what's going to be done. So, as an individual homeowner, if you know, one of our guys or whomever is out here treating, an individual homeowner comes out and asks, hey, can you spray this? Can you do this? No, we have to go to the board or to the manager, you know, so aesthetics, everybody has an opinion. You know, those of us that, you know, fishermen, outdoors, kind of understand the purpose of the plants. We've got a totally different viewpoint of what a good, healthy, beautiful lake is. You know, I'm looking for a 12-pound bass. Somebody else might be looking for a swimming hole. You know, like many times people have been sold a home in a new development. They bought their home when they were digging the lake and it was bare sand. They come back next year, it's planted, it looks great, it's like it's supposed to be. They thought they were getting beachfront property. You know, I have a big thing with realtors, and I got a few in my family, is like, don't sell a pipe dream. Okay, get the extra money for the waterfront property, but if it's a marsh, tell them it's a marsh. If it's a wetland, tell them it's a wetland. Don't tell them it's a lake, like Lake Michigan, that's going to be, you know, 100 foot deep.
One more comment. Those of you who sign up, we want the Lake Committee to be very powerful. We want heavy influence from this lake.
And Matt, you brought up a good point, if I can just so everybody knows who lives on a lake, there are certain things called littoral rights, riparian rights, and a bunch of different things. Except for those who live on the man-made lake, there is a 10-foot easement around every lake in Sandoval. You do not own to the water's edge. You may have paid for a lake view or a lake premium. You have to maintain that easement just like you have to maintain the one in your front yard. But if you look at your survey will stop about 10 feet from the seasonal high water line. So you do not own that. And unfortunately, if you were told, like Matt just said, if you were told you did, like you have lakefront, you have lake view. That is HOA property for maintenance. If anything gets planted in there that wasn't supposed to be, it could be removed or whatever, but you do not own or have rights to the water.
And if you're interested in this stuff, like what he just said there, South Florida Water Management District, the permits, the designs, the schematics, is all online. So you could see exactly, and it'll show you the lake management easement, it'll show you the pipes that connect. You may have to do a little digging around, but you can find it.
We made it easy to access those, so if you go to our, and thanks Matt for pointing that out, but if you go to the Live Sandoval website, we did a page for lakes and ponds some years ago, so there's a lot of good information in there. Starts off basic, you can branch off and get into more detail, but it can give you a good understanding of lake biology in terms of a lot of the things that Matt's talking about here. But it does have links, all those individual environmental resource permits. I mean, things like this, you can talk about schematics and stuff.
But there's some exceptions to that, 'cause I know in my plot plan brings me right down to the water.
Correct, because you're on the Guaro pit.
And it
Correct.
does say there's some easement to go through there for maintenance, but the property goes right to the water.
Correct. You're probably the only exception in that area.
But there is that.
Yep.
Not that I'm against.
If I can, and it was a very good point, because One of the reasons why I thought this was a good idea to have Matt come down here is really because of education. We're getting a lot of people moving to Florida all of a sudden. They really don't know a lake from a pond from stormwater. And as a matter of fact, just recently, it's just education, right? We had some owner who thought that she owned all the way into the water and removed the littorals. And she didn't think she was doing anything wrong. And as you can hear today, because the littorals are very important to the ecosystem. And that's what we want to do is just get the word out, basic understanding of what lake management is and what our responsibilities are as management, staff, and owners. So.
If anybody gets upset about their 10-foot easement, I could give them a contact for a community in Alva that they bought 5-acre lots, okay? Well, they found out from the district that 3 acres was a protected wetland that's completely overgrown with Brazilian peppers, and they're having to spend about $50,000 each homeowner to clear out the Brazilian peppers from the wetland that's, by the way, not your acreage. That's where I get frustrated with things, and it's just...
Your sisters better sign up now.
So, the 10-foot easement, anybody want to volunteer? Anybody see anything wrong with this lake? It's a trick question. So,
What's that buffer area?
this lake does have algae, okay? Now, this is in the fall, so the spike rush here, or we'll call them reeds, because that's what a lot of people call them colloquially. People say they have reeds in their backyard, it's probably spike rush. This algae here, this is in the fall, it's been treated, it's dying, it's wounded, but this type of algae in amongst the plants actually is very good if you're trying to consume nutrients, okay? This algae is consuming a ton of nutrients. This buffer area is fine where it's at. This is on the back side of a community. There's nobody walking back here. There's no home front over here. So there's really nothing wrong with this. Now, I throw this in here because this is a situation like where it's at there, it's okay because, hey, this algae's gonna drop out. I just want to throw the picture in. But the buffer zone was something I wanted to throw in. That's what that community wants for back there because nobody's back there and they want to slow down erosion. You can see how they've got a steep incline there. But that doesn't mean that that's good for everybody else. When you get talking aesthetics and what's wrong or not wrong with the lake, just make sure that you're on the same talking ground because terminology can be, I might say something's wrong with the lake and you say something's wrong with the lake and we're talking about two totally different things because we're looking at it from two different stakeholder viewpoints, if you will. Problematic lake. So this is more one that's problematic, okay? There is no plants. This is a new community. But this is what one looks like when it's dug, okay? So you see your ponds now. They've got plants around them. They've got life. This is what one looks like without the life. You see the erosion there, okay? That is what happens if you were to come in and you just spray everything. You got rid of all your littorals. You sprayed it nonstop. This is what you would end up with. Was a question? No native plants. Very few birds, if ever. There was some dead matter in there, but you can't see it in the picture. But that gives you. Let's put these back to back because they're now. This is also problematic. This is what happens. That TMDL that I discussed earlier, your pond gets to where it's unable to hold any excessive runoff because it's exceeded that threshold. This community was getting harmful algae blooms. This has cyanobacteria. This is the actual harmful algae blooms that the news tells you all the time about. And this was beside of the river, this particular community. We could treat this algae, planktonic algae, it's all planktonic algae. It looks kind of like green paint. It's single-celled. There's filamentous algae, that's the mats in the first picture. Planktonic algae is in every lake. You just don't see it unless it gets abundant like this. Okay, it's kind of the base of the food chain. algaecide would kill this, it'd be gone in 2 days, look great. But as soon as it was dead, the nutrients was released right back into the water column, and it was back before 7 days, just like this. And you're not allowed to treat 2 weeks. You have to have a 2-week interval before you could do another major algaecide treatment. So we ended up with aeration, bacteria, and a couple of other alternative methods. We've got that community cleaned up and in the right track. But just giving you, so when people say my lake is terrible, giving you a couple of different ideas of what truly terrible lakes are. And integrated lake management plan and goals. I mean, that's kind of what you should be shooting for with your lake management, your landscape committee, or your general HOA board. You want to manage nutrients levels, keep them as low as possible, control invasive plants, monitor erosion, and implement repairs that you've already discussed. That's something that right now is not a real good time to do that, but keep debris and seed pods out of the pond. That's another thing. So if that picture here was, let's go back. Let's say this is a buffer area you let go, okay, and it's torpedo grass. And you come through and weed eat that because you want it to look good. Obviously it's gotten tall and now we're weed eating. Well, if the torpedo grasses went to seed, you just got a torpedo grass everywhere. Okay, so make sure that you're working together. I'm not a landscaper. I'll never try to tell them how to do their job. I make money trying to get rid of plants, and I go home on my ranch and spend all of it trying to grow plants. So I respect landscapers, but just make sure that there is somewhat communication there between the two vendors. Preserve healthy environment for wildlife. Keep connections between the ponds open so water can flow. Treat the algae, submerged vegetation as needed, and have a plan for no man's land if you ever have that concern. Keep your aeration working properly. There's rebuild kits. You want to make sure those are working. You cannot over aerate a pond. There's a saturation point where that's the maximum amount of dissolved oxygen it's going to hold. But you can definitely under aerate a pond. And if you do that, you create a mess. And that's done basically, let's say if your deep lake, your compressor's working half as good as it's supposed to, it's all worn out. It doesn't have enough pressure to move that water from the bottom to the top. Well, what you're doing is you're pushing stuff that's laid dormant at the bottom. Now you're pushing it up halfway through the water column. So now it's getting up here where it can be utilized to grow. That was one of the problems that had happened in that picture I showed you with the algae blooms. That was another contributing factor is they didn't have enough aeration to actually break the thermocline. So it just had constant nutrients that was being pushed up and not out. Allow the littoral plants to continue, build homeowner awareness, and encourage residents to stay involved. 33 minutes it says I've been talking, so if you stayed with me this long, 3 key concepts. Initial design. The developers focus on efficiency, beauty, and cost. They are not concerned with your shorelines or your lake being functional in 20 years. That's your problem, not theirs. Just remember that, okay? Father Time does not wait on anybody. Community lakes are a trash collector. Say it very softly. Don't want to upset anybody for their lakefront property, but everything goes into the lake, okay? If it's not consumed or decomposed fastly, it's going into the pond. All right, just know everything, whether it's your dish soap, whether it's your detergent, it's your roof runoff, it's your road runoff, everything. Homeowner awareness. You could have the best property manager, you could have the best board. A couple thousand people in here, they're not going to be able to do it by themselves. Your community's not going to want to pay anything to upkeep it if they don't understand and have a concept of the why. Because like I said, I think is very important. It's just not as instantly gratifying as some of the other items that people are very willing to pay for. And if it's understood, it's a lot easier to ask for those items and plan for it than if it's not. And this is my closing kind of statement, I redo it a little bit, but I'm very passionate about it, is knowledge is power, clean water is healthy lakes. We must do our part on a personal level to improve not only your personal stakehold of your stormfront pond, but for your kids, the grandkids, the future generations. Like I said, there is not a reservoir in the world that will be able to store all of this excessive nutrients if we keep adding to it. So if each person just, makes that unconscious step that you're unaware of now, but once you know it, you do that one extra thing on the micro scale, that your pond it may stay healthy longer with minimal cost. On the macro scale, we might not have the issues that we're having with Lake Okeechobee and the river and the red tide and everything else that's harming our water bodies. Question?
Do you take care of our lakes now, or who takes care of our lakes?
Solitude is the company that we have a contract with. That contract is either has expired or about to expire, and as we renew, we'll be looking at options.
As we mentioned about the potential for certain erosion, and when it comes to being financially prudent, I have to say that because the treasurer's over here. We have to have multiple bids, so it's prudent for us to speak to other vendors to secure quotes from multiple sources, so we just don't have one quote.
For the Lakes Committee?
Definitely agree on that.
Just thank my wife up.
What?
Just thank my wife up.
Oh, because she got for you.
I texted.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Matt, good to see you again.
I'm shocked.
Yeah,
Great job.